So, have you ever felt that frustrating distance in a relationship? Like you're trying to connect, but there's just, I don't know, wall up.
Yeah.
Maybe communication feels like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
Or you just can't seem to get on the same emotional page with someone you really care about.
Oh, absolutely. That feeling of disconnect, it's incredibly common, and it often points to these deeper dynamics at play.
Deeper dynamics.
Yeah, and how we express and receive emotion, or sometimes how we don't.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we're diving into today. We've gathered a stack of your sources articles, some research bits, notes you shared.
Right.
And our mission really is to distill them.
Mm-hmm.
We want to pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising facts about what these sources tell us about emotional availability and the flip side, unavailability.
And inexpressiveness, too?
Yes, and emotional inexpressiveness, and also that state people call emotional shutdown.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. But the goal is simple, to help you walk away better informed about why connection can be so challenging and, maybe more importantly, how it can actually be nurtured.
Okay, so starting point. What are we actually talking about here, according to these sources? Emotional unavailability or maybe inexpressiveness? It often looks like hesitation.
Hesitation about what?
About investing deeply, maybe. Especially in, a future together, this might show up as avoiding those vulnerable conversations.
Like the what are we talk.
Exactly that. Or just a general reluctance, to put feelings out there.
And this isn't just about romantic stuff, is it? That hesitation, that holding back,
Yeah.
it could be tied to what society expects.
Yeah.
Or just things we learned.
Absolutely. It's broader than just romance, and then separate from that, but related, is emotional shutdown.
Okay.
The sources seem to frame this less as a choice or a learned thing, and more as an often unconscious coping mechanism.
A coping mechanism? How so?
It's what can happen when someone feels totally overwhelmed, by emotional demands, or they feel threatened by intimacy itself.
So they just withdraw.
Yeah, it's a withdrawal, almost like the system just pulls back to protect itself from what feels like it could be emotional pain.
That makes sense. Like a self-protection instinct when things get too intense.
Mm-hmm. And then, on the other side of the spectrum, the thing we're often aiming for, emotional intimacy.
Right. The goal.
Yeah. And the material defines this as absolutely essential. You need it for deep connection, for relationship satisfaction. It's built by sharing how you feel, by being really present.
Present, yeah. Not just physically there.
Exactly. Truly present. And showing affection, of course.
Okay. So we have this range. A learned at holding back, a protective pulling away, and then this vital goal of deep connection.
Nicely put. Those are the key states.
So how do these actually show up? Like in day-to-day life, what are the signs you might see based on the sources?
Okay, so for unavailability or inexpressiveness, you see that hesitation around commitment, maybe avoiding future talk, avoiding vulnerable topics generally.
And the inexpressiveness part.
That can look like just emotional flatness. Or maybe emotions only come out as tightly controlled frustration or anger, especially during arguments.
Ah, yeah.
And just avoiding talking about feelings altogether.
I've definitely heard people describe that. Arguments where one person's trying to process things emotionally and the other just seems shut down or gives minimal factual responses.
Precisely. That's a common picture. And emotional shutdown itself, that really looks like the withdrawal we talked about.
Just pulling back emotionally.
Yeah. And the sources are clear. This isn't harmless. It has real, often lasting effects on both people and the relationship itself.
Okay. One sign the sources really seem to flag was this inability to state your own needs. Where does the material say that comes from?
That often tracks right back to past experiences,
Yeah.
especially childhood.
Makes sense.
If your needs, emotional needs, physical needs were consistently ignored or dismissed or maybe even actively rejected when you tried to express them,
Oof.
yeah, you learn a tough lesson. Asking
Yeah.
for what you need, not safe, maybe even pointless.
And that sticks with you.
Totally. That history can kind of hardwire a pattern of withdrawal. It makes it incredibly difficult later on to feel like you even deserve to ask or to feel capable of asking others to respect your boundaries or meet your needs healthily.
Wow. That really connects the past to present struggles with being vulnerable, doesn't it?
It really does.
So let's dig even deeper then. Why? What are the underlying reasons, the root causes the sources get into for why these patterns develop in the first place?
Well, a huge thread running through pretty much all the sources is the impact of childhood. Adverse childhood experience, ACEs, people call them.
Right. Things like neglect, abuse.
Exactly. Neglect, abuse, difficult household situations, and specifically emotional neglect where a child's feelings were just consistently overlooked or invalidated. That stuff leaves a deep mark.
And it affects adult relationships.
Hugely. It doesn't just make expressing emotion hard, it fundamentally shapes how you approach safety, trust, connection, all of it.
And it's not always like active neglect, right?
Mhm.
The sources mention something about parents who are just inexpressive themselves.
Yes, that's a key point too. If you grew up with parents who couldn't or didn't express their own emotions openly, that models a certain way of being. It basically teaches the child, often implicitly, that emotions are things you hide or push down.
So it becomes a learned behavior passed down.
Absolutely, and the research specifically links ACEs to real outcomes later. Lower positive emotional expression, less ability to trust, even affecting happiness and loneliness levels in adulthood.
Trauma naturally comes up a lot too.
It does, yeah. Trauma can lead to emotional numbing, or make it incredibly difficult to even figure out what you're feeling, let alone say it.
And the sources had an important point about trauma responses.
Yes. That many of these responses, withdrawal, numbing, feeling detached, are actually normal reactions, normal biological and psychological reactions to deeply abnormal, threatening experiences.
So it's not necessarily a sign of, like, mental illness.
Not inherently, no. Though they are definitely distressing, it's more the system trying its best to cope with something overwhelming. And interpersonal trauma involving other people that hits our attachment systems particularly hard.
Attachment systems.
Yeah.
Like how we learn to connect.
Exactly. How we learn to form bonds based on those earliest relationships. Interpersonal trauma can really scramble that.
Okay. Another huge piece the sources explored. Social constructs. Gender roles. This seems really tied to that inexpressiveness idea.
Oh, it's a massive factor. Societal expectations, especially around traditional masculinity, they often put immense pressure on people, particularly men, to suppress emotions.
The whole vulnerability is weakness thing.
Precisely. That old boys don't cry narrative. It's not just a cliche. It reflects real socialization. Stuff taught early on by parents, by peers, by the culture.
But the research you looked at, it wasn't saying that simply women are emotional, men aren't.
Definitely not. It's way more nuanced. The material shows that gender patterns and expression really vary depending on the specific emotion.
How so?
Well, for example, some research might suggest women tend to express more positive or vulnerable emotions outwardly, while men might express anger or hostile emotions more readily. But crucially, this seems heavily shaped by socialization.
So learned behavior again.
Largely, yes. There's an ongoing debate in the research, about how much is biology versus social construction, and culture plays a huge part too. Think about how different cultures view emotional expression.
Right, like individualistic versus collectivistic cultures.
Exactly. And yes, for many men, the sources highlight this very real fear that expressing emotions openly might make them seem less competent, less strong, especially in work or social settings.
So it's this complex mix. Personal history, trauma, plus these powerful cultural messages we absorb.
Precisely. And individuals internalize it. They might develop these automatic internal commands like shut down, don't feel that, push it away, especially when a conversation feels like it's, quote, getting deep.
And you also mentioned alexithymia briefly.
Yes, the sources included that. It's a recognized challenge some people face in just identifying and describing their own emotions, which naturally makes expressing them to others pretty difficult. It can be a contributing factor here.
Wow. Okay, so we're talking about this really intricate weave. Biology, maybe, personal history, trauma, societal conditioning. What's the end result? What's the impact of all this on the person and, on their relationships?
For the individual who's struggling with inexpressiveness or shutdown, the fallout can be pretty significant. Things like increased stress, anxiety, depression, those are common.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They might grapple with lower self-esteem, maybe even have trouble recognizing their own emotions or understanding what they need. And the sources also link severe emotional distress and difficulty coping with a higher risk of substance abuse.
As a way to cope.
Often, yeah. A way to numb out or escape overwhelming feelings, especially after trauma. And even self-harming behaviors can sometimes be linked as a way to deal with intense distress or feeling disconnected, dissociated.
That sounds incredibly difficult. A really heavy internal burden. And what about the partner? The relationship itself?
Well, these issues put a huge strain on relationships. That lack of emotional connection, it leads to misunderstandings, resentment builds up over time.
Yeah.
And the partner on the receiving end can feel incredibly lonely, unsupported, sometimes like they don't even really know the person they're with. And the material points out that suppressing emotions can be especially damaging when the person actually wants to express them, but feels trapped or unable to.
Okay, now here's where it got really fascinating for me. There was that specific finding about emotional suppression and relationship satisfaction. It wasn't straightforward, was it? Like suppression bad.
No, not at all. This research was really intriguing. It suggests the effect of suppressing emotions on, say, marital satisfaction. It depends on a couple of things.
Yeah.
One is the person's main motivation style. Are they more focused on preventing bad stuff or achieving good stuff? And the other, critically, is how they perceive their partner's level of emotional suppression.
All right, okay, let's break that down. What about the people focused on preventing negative outcomes? The prevention folks.
So, for individuals mainly motivated by prevention, avoiding conflict, avoiding discomfort, keeping things stable, suppressing their own emotions, was actually linked with higher marital satisfaction.
Really, higher.
But, and this is key, only when they saw their spouse as also being highly emotionally suppressive.
So if both partners are keeping a lid on it, it feels okay.
Or predictable.
Kind of. It's like the matching style feels safer or more predictable for someone focused on avoiding negativity. But if their spouse was less suppressive, then their own suppression was linked to lower satisfaction. The mismatch creates distress.
Got it. Okay, so matching styles can sometimes work for prevention-focused people. What about the other group? The promotion-motivated people.
Right. Those folks focused on growth, closeness, positive experiences. For them, being less emotionally suppressive themselves was linked to higher satisfaction. Makes sense, right?
But again, with a condition. This link was strongest when they perceived their spouse as also being less suppressive.
So you need a match there, too, for the best outcome.
It seems so. If you're driven to connect through open expression, it feels best when your partner meets you there. If your partner is suppressive, your own openness doesn't automatically translate to higher satisfaction in that specific dynamic.
That's wow. It really underscores that it's not about one person being right or wrong in how they express emotions. It's about the interaction between two people's styles and motivations.
Absolutely. The impact isn't simple. It depends on the context, on the partner. And, while we're talking about expressing things, the sources are also pretty realistic about vulnerability.
Right. It's key for intimacy, but it's risky.
Exactly. Opening yourself up means you could get hurt. You could feel diminished if that vulnerability isn't met with care or understanding, or if the other person doesn't reciprocate.
And the sources distinguish that from, unhealthy patterns.
Yes, like oversharing just to dump emotions or being vulnerable just to get validation. Real intimacy needs vulnerability, but it's a specific kind of mutual trusting openness.
Okay. So given all these deep roots and tricky impacts, what do the sources suggest we can actually do? What strategies came up for building stronger emotional connections?
Open communication.
Yeah.
That came up again and again. It's the foundation.
Makes sense?
Talking openly. Honestly, not just facts, but feelings. It cuts down misunderstandings. It builds trust. One really practical tip was consciously using I feel statements.
Ah, yes.
Followed by a specific emotion word. So not you make me angry, but I feel frustrated when X happens, or I feel hurt by Y. The sources really stress that you have to communicate your inner world. You can't just assume your partner knows.
Yeah, mind reading doesn't work. And communication is definitely a two-way street. Active listening must be in there.
Absolutely vital. And the sources describe it as more than just, not talking. It involves visible stuff, nodding, eye contact, facing the person, and verbal cues like, or wow, that sounds hard. And really key, focusing on and reflecting back the emotion words the speaker uses. That shows you're validating their feelings.
And actually taking turns being the speaker and listener.
Yes. Genuinely switching roles.
Okay. Beyond talking, what about affection? Physical touch, words.
Crucial. Physical touch, hugs, holding hands, kissing, and verbal affirmations like saying, I appreciate you or I love you. These are powerful tools. They strengthen bonds, boost satisfaction. The sources even connect this to oxytocin release.
The love hormone.
That's the one. It literally helps create feelings of closeness.
But what if people have different comfort levels? One person needs lots of hugs, the other not so much.
That's where talking about it comes in. The sources suggest having open conversations about those differing needs and finding a middle ground, a compromise. Maybe exploring something like love languages could help understand how each person prefers to give and receive affection.
And respecting boundaries is key there, I imagine.
Absolutely essential. Pushing someone past their comfort zone with emotional or physical expression, that's likely to backfire badly.
Makes sense. What about just spending time together?
Super important. Prioritizing quality time, and the emphasis is on quality. Undistracted time, phones away. Being truly present with each other, that fosters closeness.
Little rituals can help too.
Yeah, things like maybe sharing the highs and lows of your day, or expressing gratitude for something specific your partner did. Doing that regularly can build a real sense of safety and connection.
And being clear about why you're bringing something up, if it's a tough conversation.
Yes, sharing your intentions, being open about your motivation. I want to talk about this because I want us to feel closer, or I need to understand this better. That builds trust. Hidden agendas erode safety fast.
It really sounds like building these connections takes real conscious effort. Practice. What if someone feels like, okay, these strategies are good, but the problems feel deeper, too ingrained?
That's where the most consistent, most emphatic recommendation came through in the sources. Seek professional help.
Therapy or counseling?
Exactly. Highlight it as a crucial resource. A good therapist can help you identify the root causes, work through past stuff, trauma, those early experiences that created these patterns, and they give you tools to break those cycles.
And what about for the couple together?
Couples counseling was specifically mentioned as really beneficial. Having a neutral third party can help partners see communication breakdowns clearly, address things like unavailability or different needs for affection, and give structured ways to rebuild the bond.
And there's a pretty direct message about not just waiting around.
Yes, one source literally said, don't wait for things to get better on their own. If you recognize these struggles in yourself or in your relationship, reaching out for professional guidance is presented as a really proactive, strong step to take.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground today. It's clear that emotional availability, inexpressiveness, shutdown, these are really complex states.
Deeply complex, influenced by everything from our earliest experiences, trauma, to the social messages we swim in every day.
And they have a huge impact
Mm-hmm.
on our own well-being and the health of our closest relationships.
And this is the hopeful part, the sources also offer a clear path forward, the strategies we talked about. Open communication, active listening, affection, quality time, understanding needs. These are tangible tools.
Tools you can actually use.
Right. Tools you can use to navigate these complexities and build stronger, more fulfilling connections. And maybe the most important thing, recognizing when you need help. That's not failure. The sources frame seeking professional help as a necessary, sometimes courageous step.
Yeah. Seems challenges in emotional connection are just
Yeah.
really common because of this whole intricate web of factors. But the good news from these sources is that they are addressable. Understanding the why seems like the crucial first step to creating the connection you want.
Absolutely. And maybe just a final thought to leave you with, drawing from that whole discussion on vulnerability. Expressing how you truly feel, especially those deeper, more vulnerable emotions. It is inherently a choice that involves risk. You have to accept the possibility of being hurt, you know? If that openness isn't met with the care or understanding you hope for.
That's the scary part.
It is. Yet the sources also make it incredibly clear. That kind of courageous vulnerability, despite the risk, is the absolute